It's hard to imagine that we live in a world filled with everlasting diseases that have affected billions of people from the rise of ape to mankind. Life is such a wonderful thing, although everything isn't always perfect. Diseases such as AIDS, HIV, swine flu, Ebola, and the bubonic plague are just some of the thousands of diseases that have sickened many people. Breakthroughs in technology and medical miracles have advanced our society into a time where vaccines and medications are a crucial element to our survival. Our documentary is not only going to take you back into time to learn about the past diseases, but we are going to give you an insight into the shocking world of the evolution and formation of diseases. The Black Death, the Black Plague, the Blue Sickness, the Great Mortality, the Great Plague of Seville, the Great Plague of London, the Great Plague of Vienna, the Great Baltic Plague, and the Great Plague of Marseille. This disease is most commonly known as the bubonic plague in today's world, but when it first appeared, it was dubbed the Plague of Justinian, after the reigning ruler. This plague began a very long time ago, 542 BC, when the Byzantine Empire was intact and thriving. But the real mystery and oddity of the disease was how it jumped to people, and sequentially how it began to spread from person to person. This plague, raging in the heart of Europe, was spread through fleas, little parasites traveling within the fur of rats. The strangest thing about this ailment was the black boils that started to mysteriously appear and then begin to ooze black pus and blood. They soon coined this mysterious disease the Black Death. The Sicilian authorities hastily ordered the fleet of death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. Over the next 5 years, the mysterious Black Death would kill more than 20 million people in Europe, almost 1/3 of the continent's population. The people of that time did not understand the science behind the disease and decided that the only explanation must have been divine or of divine origins. Divine punishment, that is, retribution for all the blasphemy, sins, and greed they partake in. If this was divine punishment, then the only way to stop this infectious disease was to get divine forgiveness. They sought this forgiveness by purging the town of any and all heretics and troublemakers. This purging fell upon the Jewish, who to the villagers were the heretics that brought the plague down upon them all. Aside from the history of the disease, there is actually an outbreak happening merely continents away in Madagascar. Every year between 1,000 to 2,000 people contract the bubonic plague. The disease is much more than a small bacterial infection and does not just affect faraway countries with limited access to Western medicines. The bubonic plague is fairly treatable, but given that Madagascar is a less developed country, it has very limited access to medical resources and a sterile environment to treat cases.
We're going to take you to the front lines of a different kind of medical fight, the one to save millions of the world's most vulnerable children from pneumonia, which kills 1.5 million children under the age of 5 every year. Now, a new vaccine is being rolled out.
An Ebola vaccine made in these labs at the National Institutes of Health has already shown promise in animal studies. Now human clinical trials are set to begin.
The day after Labor Day, next week, we're going to be putting this vaccine for the first time in humans for what we call early safety
They've lived in a world
study.
of infectious diseases that destroyed children's futures, and they desperately wanted to leave that world behind. These vaccines work so well that the memory of these diseases has faded, and the importance of vaccination has become
An
less
experimental
obvious.
new treatment could bring those numbers down. The idea is to train the body's immune system to fight the disease, and if it works, it might be a way to prevent it.
Vaccines are thought to be a relatively new advancement in medical technology, but according to ancient artifacts such as drawings and writings, the early processes of vaccination began as early as 1000 AD in China. Vaccination is the process of taking a living form of a bacteria or a virus and placing it into a host with the hope that the immune system will be able to manage a small amount and design a natural cure for it. Scientifically, vaccines work by stimulating our immune system to produce antibodies, substances produced by the body to fight disease, without actually infecting us with the disease. They trigger the immune system to produce its own antibodies. Vaccines have eliminated strands of disease and bacteria at shocking rates within the last century. This was an amazing feat for medical scientists at the time. Now, people don't have to die from the same diseases that killed their ancestors hundreds of years ago. Sometimes people just get a quick shot and their body is immune to a whole array of diseases. The Ebola disease is a severe, fatal, and deadly disease that affects humans. The disease is transmitted to people from wild animals and spreads in the human population through human-to-human transmission. The average Ebola case fatality rate is around 50%. The fatality rates are varied from 25% to 90% in past outbreaks throughout the years that Ebola has been around. The first Ebola outbreaks occurred in distant villages in Central Africa, in a tropical rainforest, but the most recent outbreak was in Western Africa. The most recent outbreaks have affected thousands of people, creating an outburst of chaos for whether people will survive or not. The key to decreasing the spread of the disease is having safe sanitation, as well as not coming into contact with people who have the deadly disease. Currently, there are no official Ebola vaccines, although there are 2 potential vaccines that are being examined and looked at as to whether they are safe or not. The current outbreak that is going on in Western Africa began in March of 2014 and is the most complex Ebola outbreak that humankind has become witness to. It has become one of the most complex outbreaks, using up a lot of resources from countries and bringing in a high death toll. The first outbreak was in 1976, although back then not much information was known about Ebola. There are still a lot of missing puzzles when it comes to connecting everything together for what truly is the cause of Ebola. It is a mysterious disease that has affected many innocent people, young and old. In all of its travels, Ebola has spread from Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, the USA, Senegal, and Mali. Many of these countries, such as Guinea and Sierra Leone, have poor health systems and operations set up. This lackluster of support and medical stability has prolonged the outbreak. We stopped by the comments to ask a few people we know some simple questions about Ebola.
That it's a disease in Africa. Well, originally comes from Africa. The effects it gets you very sick and you definitely can die from it.
Do you know how it spreads?
Spreads by hands and touch and no body fluid. So I don't think they would get a small outbreak, but they would control it very fast. I think the CDC is like strong enough to control it.
Read in the newspaper.
Just what we read in the newspaper. Like
And that it's a scary disease. It could cause death. That's what scares me. I don't worry about it here in the United States. What I worry about is people who travel to foreign countries that have multiple Ebola cases already.
It's a highly pathogenic virus through direct contact. I honestly feel like we, we should be okay, but yeah, I mean, if it did get into an outbreak type situation where it got onto somebody and spread before they contained it quickly, then yeah, you could be dealing with a pretty dangerous situation for the populace.
Right.
And we live in the time of international flights.
Right.
And that's all it takes is one guy on an international flight and travel around a city, and next thing you know, 20 people are infected, and then, I mean, the chances of that aren't the greatest, hence the slight, but, you know.
We were also able to email Professor Margaret Sears, a professor at Cape Cod Community College. We asked her a few questions, and one of them was, how are you able to map a disease like Ebola? She replied back saying, what was so devastating about the Ebola outbreak was the lack of preparedness to isolate, diagnose, and treat these patients. There is no cure for the disease, and the Ebola virus is highly virulent. This means that if you get infected, there is a high chance you will get sick and die. The frequency of international travels by the public and healthcare workers also made us realize that diseases that occur in a far corner of the world can be in our midst before we know it.
A fresh alleged atrocity from ISIS. Kurdish forces on the ground in Iraq say ISIS fighters used chemical weapons against them, specifically chlorine gas.
Biological warfare, also known as germ warfare, is the use of biological toxins or infectious agents such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi with the intent to kill humans, animals, or plants as an act of war. Biological warfare has been happening since 300 CE, when the Greeks, Romans, and Persians threw animal feces and carcasses in water wells with the intent to infect the townspeoples. Next, in the 14th century, the Mongols threw bodies infected by the Black Death over the walls of nearby cities to terrify them so the Mongols could get more power. These early forms of biological warfare were just getting started. In 1975, the Biological Weapons Commission had more than 160 countries that permitted the use and testing of biological weapons for offensive reasons, but allowed the development and testing of biological warfare for defensive purposes. The most recent acts of biological warfare are more secret. For example, conspirators have sent letters filled with anthrax to high-ranking government officials. Biological warfare is extremely unstable in nature. It causes mass panic and a lot of casualties.
Commercial American operations in Vietnam.
Just the name of it evokes all sorts of horrible images. Agent Orange.
During the Vietnam War, Americans were told that spraying millions of acres of dense jungle with Agent Orange would deprive the Viet Cong of cover and save GIs' lives. But in the decades since, the herbicide's use in Vietnam has been blamed for creating a human catastrophe among veterans.
I died in Vietnam and didn't even know it.
And the Vietnamese.
Vietnam is convinced that these children are just the latest victims of the deadly chemical dioxin in Agent Orange.
Now, more than 40 years later, the fight over Agent Orange continues to take new turns.
In the Vietnam War, the U.S. released a pesticide known as Agent Orange in hopes of clearing brush to make the jungle more maneuverable. Although, when humans came in contact with this toxin, their cells mutated, and a large population of Vietnamese developed cancer. HIV and AIDS are one of the worst viruses to catch. HIV is a virus that attacks your cells directly. HIV isn't a killer though. Weakening your system is the main goal. HIV directly attacks CD4 plus cells in your body. These CD4 plus cells are T cells, which are crucial for fighting off infections. The problem is that AIDS leaves you with a crippled immune system. Your chance of catching an infection after getting HIV is much higher. AIDS also will affect your digestive system. People with AIDS have been more susceptible to an infection on the tongue. AIDS awareness was the majority of the problem for this virus. When AIDS first started to be prominent in the United States, the spread of the disease was mainly due to the ignorance of the people who didn't have it. AIDS was primarily prominent towards the gay population in the United States. People believed that it was also able to be picked up by sitting on a toilet seat. If we knew the direct cause of AIDS and raised proper awareness before the disease spread throughout the United States, then we might have had an easy way to prevent it from affecting a large number of the population. Many famous people have had HIV. These people include Freddie Mercury, singer of Queen, and Irvin Magic Johnson.
News headquarters in New York.
Today's world centers heavily around the media. The media is where we and the rest of the world get information and entertainment. Sadly, what the media shows isn't always true and doesn't tell us everything in the 12 o'clock news. The media chooses what is shown and what grabs the eye of the audience. The general public knew about the Ebola outbreak of 2014, but the general public was left unaware of the bubonic plague outbreak, which started just around the same time. The media has taken this craze for zombies and ran with it, creating an ambience of TV shows and movies to meet the demand of the audience. iZombie, Warm Zombies, The Walking Dead, I Am Legend, and World War Z are just a few of the movies and TV shows created with zombies. While many of these films show it is possible for a disease outbreak to wipe out the majority of the world population, what they don't show is how it is impossible for a zombie outbreak to occur, since reanimation is not possible. The media incorporates all parts: the disease, biological warfare, and vaccines.